everybody. I would like to call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. May I have the roll call, please?
Chair McGill,
Here.
Vice Chair Clark, Commissioner Aldana,
Present.
Commissioner Lesnar-Buxton,
Yeah.
Commissioner Unander LaBerge.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, there are no changes to the agenda.
Okay, thank you. All right, that takes us to written public comment. We've received a number of written a number of written public comments, but as far as I'm aware, they all pertain to the agenda item on Anapamu Street. I have not seen anything other than that. Is that correct? Yep. Okay, great. Thanks. That brings us to public comment. Any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. The total amount of time for public comment will be 15 minutes. Those of you that have submitted slips to talk about the stone pines, we will take that when we talk about the stone pines in a few minutes. Do we have I have no speaker slips other than the agenda item. Do we have anybody online, or is there anything that you have?
No, Chair McGill, there's no one online.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And that takes us to the Commissioner Committee assignment reports. I will start with Commissioner Aldana.
Nothing to report this month.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Clark.
I did not attend the the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting, but I did make an appointment and visit with Mr. Slack and discuss everything that was talked about at that meeting.
Okay, thanks. And Commissioner Lesnar-Buxton.
Nothing to report here.
Okay, thank you. As far as me, we did not have a Park Foundation meeting this past month, and there was an integrated pest management meeting last week. Processed a couple of exemptions and approved the annual report. And I guess anybody who's interested in the strategy for pesticide, herbicide use in the city, I can highly recommend reading that report. It's really well done and a good piece of work, as it is every year. And with that, that takes us to commission and staff communications. Anything, Director Zachary?
Yeah, Chair McGill and Commissioners, no other communications.
Okay, great, thank you. And what about ceremonial items?
Chair McGill, this month we do not have any employee recognitions.
All right, well, thank you. Steady as she goes. And then that takes us to our consent items. We have the summary of council actions, which is that we have the one purchase obviously for the golf course. And if there are I assume there are no questions or comments to that. It looks pretty straightforward. And then that takes us to the minutes of the last meeting, and with the recommendation that the commission waive the reading and approve the minutes of the regular meeting of September 25th. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
All right, Commissioner Aldana, second. Any second?
I'll second.
Okay, Vice Chair Clark, we have a motion and a second. I think we can go straight to a vote. All righty, thank you very much. And that takes us to the street tree. So we don't have any, thank you very much. We do not have any removal requests this month, but we have two designation changes. So we will start with, hello, Mr. Slack, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair McGill and Commissioners.
Can I ask you a question before we kick off? Just a nomenclature question. I noticed that the Anapamu one is a review the existing designation, and the almond is a modify. Is there any reason behind that?
Chair McGill, Commissioners, that's a pretty good question. I think when we looked at almond, there was an expectation that we had to at least make one modification, which we'll talk about. It has to do with the city's water use efficiency ordinance. So that we really needed to kind of push it forward and change it, whereas with Anapamu, it was presented as a, let's review the designation, see what makes practical sense, and it could have been that there was a recommendation to retain the existing designation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. The first Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is a request to review the current street tree species designation for the 300 to 800 blocks of East Anapamu. And just for reference, that is the Italian stone pine. I wanted to provide a little bit of brief background that kind of led us to the meeting that we're having today to review the possible designation change. You may recall back in July 24th, we provided a staff report, a detailed staff report, as well as a presentation covering the existing stone pines, their conditions, some proposed work plans, which involved some removals that came about as a result of a comprehensive assessment where some trees were determined to be at a level that required removal. And then also, we sort of talked next steps, and as part of that, we shared a schedule with the commission that had us visiting the Street Tree Advisory Committee to take a look at the designation to see if it made practical sense to continue the use of stone pines, or if it was determined that a different species or multiple species made better sense for the long term, with the hope of replanting the street. I think the one thing that we can all agree on is the street could use some new trees. So we provided that report, and then I think as part of the review with the Street Tree Advisory Committee, this is in the staff report that was attached, and it goes into a lot more detail, but as part of the Street Tree Advisory Committee's review, we consulted the city attorney's office and asked them if the resolution 97-131 that designated the 79 stone pines within these blocks as a historic landmark had any mandates or essentially superseded a designation change that would prevent any other species from being planted, and thereby eliminating the commission's authority to make amendments to the street tree designation listing as defined by the street tree ordinance, chapter 15.20. So in the attorney's review, there were a few key markers. I'm just going to kind of briefly address those. And I think the sort of consistent theme in their analysis was the specificity at which the resolution was written. So one of the big things was the reference to 79 trees, very explicitly calling out the 79 existing stone pines that were on the street at the passing of the resolution in 1997. In addition to that, the 63 assessor parcel numbers were included, and I think, again, that just references the specificity. They were trying to identify where these trees were in relation to the properties, being very almost methodical about how they were acknowledging the landmark status rather than sort of generally saying, stone pines on Anapamu. And then in addition to that, there was also notes about the, further specificity in regard to the key intervals at which these landmark trees were planted. Within the resolution, in the exhibits, there were references to, obviously, Doremus's initial plantings in 1908, which would have been from the 500, 600, 700, and 800 blocks, and then references again to Ralph Stevens's additional planting of the stone pines, which were in the 300 to 400 blocks, comprising the full landmark. Again, speaking to sort of the specificity and the uniqueness of the planting. And then lastly, there is reference in Exhibit B to the commission, the Parks Commission, making a designation change in 1982 to change the street to Italian stone pines. But there's really, again, no formal mandate or charge that says stone pines have to be planted or shall be planted essentially in perpetuity within these blocks, despite the landmark status. So I think, in short, the analysis told us that the landmark is finite in that the individual trees were landmarked, And there's still 46 stone pines on the street that have landmark status, and they'll continue to be maintained by the department. But any future plantings, whether they're stone pines or any other variety of tree, would not be considered part of that historical landmark due to the specific nature and I guess the purposeful intent of the way the resolution was written in 1997. And then lastly, the city attorney's office advised us that due to Santa Barbara Municipal Code Chapter 15, Section 20, that the Parks and Recreation Commission still has the authority to make amendments or changes to the street tree master plan and thereby the street tree designation listing. So, but I do want to emphasize that the existing trees, there's 46 remaining of the landmark trees still have landmark status. They'll continue to have landmark status. Even if we plant more stone pines, there will be only 46 stone pines with landmark status, and the additional trees would not be considered part of the historical landmark. And I think it may come up, but it's probably worth referencing. There was recently a historical landmark on the State Street median, and that was between Constance and Mission. There's 6, I think, medians, and there's 2 jelly palms planted, and that was a landscape design by Ralph Talent Stevens many, many years ago. I don't know the exact time. And that was recently given historical landmark status, but it was written differently in that it was the purposeful intent of the aesthetic. So it was the repeating pattern of 2 jelly palms with some type of green ground cover, not speaking specifically to the uniqueness of the trees. So the trees themselves are part of like this historical aesthetic, and we'll continue to maintain those 2, but we've not given unique status to each individual tree. And so that would be the big difference between the last 2, between something like that and what we've seen most recently in terms of giving living plants historical landmark status in the city. And so kind of moving on to the review, the Street Tree Advisory Committee spent a considerable amount of time, as you can imagine, talking about what trees made sense. There were 17 total trees proposed. That list whittled down pretty quickly. There were really kind of only a couple that emerged as viable candidates. The stone pine obviously was discussed at great lengths. I think when they were reviewing the merits of the stone pine versus some of the challenges, I think the stuff that we talked about back in July, all of that stuff was mentioned. The hardscape damage, the prevalence of that, the frequency of that, and the need for repairs and the root pruning that leads to root decay and long-term decomposition of the root system, was a major driving factor. And I think just a general acknowledgement that given the aggressive nature of the stone pine's root system, that it really was not a practical fit for the parkways. Parkways on that street can be close to 6 feet in width, but then they shrink down to 4. And even though 6 feet is a pretty generous parkway, there was, agreement, I think, within the committee that it did not make practical sense to continue the use of stone pines. There were some other species talked about, like tipu tree was talked about, also a tree that can get, pretty big, pretty fast, also has a pretty aggressive root system. And then amongst the other trees that were talked about, the native coast live oak or Quercus agrifolia kind of emerged as sort of like the favorite sort of option amongst the committee. There was pretty intense discussion about that. I think when we back up and we look at what made the Anapamu so unique, and still unique to some extent, is, they were using the term alley, which is basically is like a tree-lined street or an alley, but it is a very powerful aesthetic, And I think that was a major driving decision-making criteria for the committee is, how can this be recreated, thoughtfully and functionally, kind of thinking about modern times and some of these challenges that may or may not have been present, nearly a century ago. They noted the coast live oak could do that. I was thinking more about it. We didn't really talk about this at the committee, but, the stone pines are kind of unruly and sort of unique in their own way. Each tree has its own, sort of appearance, and they're not very like uniform, you know, and I think the coast live oak kind of mirrors that too, which may have been in the back of their mind some of the criteria for thinking it could be a good fit on the street. It does get to a large size. It produces a lot of like just shade and all of those environmental benefits that we continually talk about that's associated with the large canopy shade tree. The high adaptability of the species was talked about. It performs well in a broad range of what we would say is like available rooting volumes or parkway widths. You know, we're down to like just under 4 feet. There's a lot of trees that you can see throughout the community, coast live oaks, that do perform well in a fairly narrow parkway. And then obviously as that parkway size increases, they have more space and they do better. And while I don't use the term deep root system often, I think that with this species, it's fair to say that that is a characteristic, you know, that we've observed certainly throughout the community. In addition to like its adaptability with sizes, the incidence of hardscape disruption within that species for the just sheer mature potential of it's very minimal, and that's pretty well documented too. And again, just from anecdotal experience at the staff level, we see lots of large coast live oaks that have coexisted with sidewalks, and the sidewalks are really old and not needing that frequent repair. I think another factor that when we talk about disruptions, the stone pines, for some reason, conifers more so than I think broadleaf trees, but the stone pine in particular has a problem with asphalt. I used to think it was heat related, causing this wounding and this burrowing, the bubbling of the asphalt. I've also been told that there's been some research done that it's due to like just cars traveling and weight, and the root system's really sensitive. So either way, you get these big gnarly burls, and so the roadway gets disrupted a lot more with that species than a lot of other, you know, large trees that we have in town too. And then going back to the adaptability of the coast live oak, it's highly sort of malleable. It can be pruned well. It can coexist, you know, near power lines. It can absolutely like kind of meander and deal with communication lines. And then also the wildlife habitat of like a local native species was really emphasized by some of the committee members as a major, you know, factor in its use. And I think just the general continued not introduction, but emphasis on utilization of, you know, native trees, certainly from at least one committee member, was a major emphasis. And so after lots and lots of discussion, and we had really great public comment and just a really great meeting overall, the committee ultimately made a recommendation to change the street tree designation for the 300 to 800 blocks of East Anapamu Street from, you know, Pinus pinea, which is the Italian stone pine, to Quercus agrifolia, the coast live oak.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to open it up to questions from the commission. I've got a whole laundry list of questions, but I'll see, anybody else want to go first? Oh, come on. Commissioner Aldana. Commissioner Aldana.
Yes, okay. So in the last 3 months, whatever process is needed to change a designated street tree, it was taken. You know, nothing got skipped. Nobody could come back later and say, you didn't follow this rule or any of that.
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, we believe we've checked all boxes, and I think it's important to note that the ultimate decision-making comes down to the Parks and Recreation Commission. So a designation change isn't official until it receives an approval from the Parks and Rec Commission.
Yeah, but I mean, plenty community outreach.
Yeah, so Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, that's a good question. I think we tried to the best of our ability to let people know, and then also to solicit input from people that are interested. So we did a press release, you know, a citywide press release. We hit the you know, social media channels, and also put one, there are actually 2 per block, similar to what we did before the removals of project, essentially a sign, 2 per block, which had information about the upcoming Parks and Recreation Commission meeting, and also a QR code that would ping you back to the project webpage that had all the background and all the information. So I think we did a good job, and I think through your packet, we received, a pretty robust amount of public communication. So I think we did, from that perspective, a really good job of trying to include the community in the process.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly saw a lot of the social media posts, and as you said, we've got a lot of written comment, and, not surprisingly, there's not a uniform view, but we got a lot of really, I would say, thoughtful comments from very engaged people. Vice Chair Clark.
Yeah, just kudos on the outreach. I had people that don't follow city business come up to me and ask me about it. Probably like 6 or 7 people that I know don't watch any city news or.
Yeah, I was getting phone calls. All right, so I've got, of course, a copy of this thing that said in 1982, the City Parks Commission officially just said designed, but designated Italian stonepipe as tree species for all future replacement parkways. That, as I understand from the staff report and what you've just reported, is not the same thing as the legal evaluation of the ordinance. This is just simply a designation from the Parks Department. Is this a correct statement?
Chair McGill, Commissioners, essentially that's correct. So that reference to the designation change, that happened, 15 years before the resolution was passed, denoting those trees as having landmark status. And I think when you read through Exhibit A and Exhibit B, there's just a lot of historical context. So I think that was just another layer kind of talking about the history that led to the landmarking. But in, going back to the city attorney analysis, the commission still has the authority to make a designation change. We're making designation changes regularly, and that will continue to happen. I think the intent of the street tree designation listing is it's sort of a living document, and as things change, we make amendments and changes to those as the commission sees fit.
Okay, thank
Chair
you.
McGill, Commissioners, that page is part of the landmark designation staff communication.
Yeah,
So that happened after the commission designated the street tree species for Anapamu.
okay, thank
It's
you.
just a historical reference, and
Yeah.
it has other information about how they were planted, conditions of the street, changes over time, et cetera. That was used to inform the city council's action in 1997. Similar that you, as a commission, can also change a designation, as you have done multiple times, depending on the rationale for those changes.
Okay, thank you. So should the designation be, well, let me go back to the landmark status of the trees and the trees that still are. So I'm pretty clear on the answer to this, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. The stone pines that exist with landmark status, there is no intent to do anything but care and maintain them. It's no intent to replace healthy landmark trees.
And Chair McGill and Commissioners, that's entirely correct,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, I just wanted to get that out there, very clearly. In terms of those trees and any living landmark, which has got to be, it's different than a brick and mortar landmark, what is different about maintenance, care and maintenance of landmark trees from, say, other trees under your care?
And Chair McGill and Commissioners, I think that's a great question. And I think really what drives a lot of those decisions is where is the tree located? If it's shoehorned between a street and a sidewalk, and there's a 8-foot setback or 10-foot setback, and then there's a 2-story apartment complex, we're pretty limited in terms of doing what really, it's like kind of like a building, right? The foundation's critical to like long-term health of the structure, as are the roots to the tree. And so without being able to make modifications to the root zone, like mulching and creating like nutrient cycling and the stuff that would occur in an open grown area where you have that natural process occurring, it becomes very limiting. So I think it's a case-by-case basis in terms of what really can be done. And then, the reality, I think, in some instances, there's a finite lifespan to everything. Living things can't go forever. And so it really depends on the age of the tree that you're dealing with. There's some, if it was, say, a younger tree, you might be able to do something. There may be some interventions, whereas if it was decades and decades older than that, those same interventions may not be effective. But I think one of the challenges specifically on the street that we've looked at is that you have extremely large trees, some of which predate the real road, that have been subject to, continual infrastructure conflicts, which leads to root pruning, and that's inarguably the worst thing that you can do in terms of managing tree health.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah, it did. Yeah, I mean, I'm taking it from the conversation that you do give it special attention and thought to a landmark status tree, but that doesn't mean you can necessarily do anything. You can't create magic for it necessarily.
Chairman Gill, we have 27,000 street trees.
I know.
And as you well know, we have less than $1 million a year to maintain those trees. So when a tree does have landmark status, certainly whenever that tree has to be touched for either maintenance or in response to an emergency, a loss of limb, which we've experienced, for example, at the pepper tree that's outside City Hall. It is really the approach of the department to do all that we can related to those trees.
Yeah.
Based on
Yeah.
their status.
Yeah, thank you very much. Should the designation be changed to live oak, what are you envisioning in terms of the size of the trees that we planted and the time to achieve canopy status? That's something that's come up in the comments.
Chair McHale, Commissioners, I think a lot of it has to do with the success of the installation. You can't guarantee that everything, if you've planted plants, there could be some variance amongst the success. I think our goal would be to try to source locally, try to find as close to native seed stock as possible. That helps to eliminate, some challenges within the species. And then the reality is that we would probably use a smaller tree because they have a tendency to outperform larger trees. We have the ability to address inherent root problems that are present in almost every container grown tree that we purchase. So the bigger they get, the harder it is to have those interventions upon installation that leads to success. Trees are special because they're generational. So to say that, we're going to have another tree-lined street in 20 years, we'll have trees on the street and it'll be lined, but will they be 60 feet tall and 60 feet wide? I highly doubt it. I think one of the things where when you think oak in general, regardless of what flavor it is, they're these multi-generational beings, often some of the longest lived species of all trees. And that comes with a little slower growth too. But that leads to a lot of benefits as well. I think maybe you could get 12, 16 inches of growth a year or something like that. But, it's decades until we'll have another great street, which is why we're here talking about, trying to plant something new as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. I think maybe, I do have other questions, but I think maybe it's time for me to stop for a little bit and open it up to public comment. So if you do wish to speak, I have a number of slips. Looks like I have another one coming. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay, I didn't see, I've been looking at my screen here. But, all right, I've got a number of speaker slips. I think many of you have been here before. For those of you who haven't, the process is that when I call your name, come up and you will have 2 minutes, and there will be a clock in front of you. And then once we do everybody in the room, we'll see if there's anybody online, and then we'll take it from there. All right, so excuse me. The first speaker I have is Robert Jones. Welcome, Mr. Jones. Once you get kicked off, you will have 2 minutes.
Okay. I've lived here for 70 years. We have a house located a half a block from Anapamoo Street. And I've watched what the city has done to those trees. The average speed of a car on Anapamoo Street right now is probably 45 miles an hour. And to say, oh yeah, we got to keep this road nice and smooth and see if we can get the cars to even go faster is absurd. Those trees have been, the ones we're talking about have been here for about 100 years. And they quit replacing those trees they cut down with a new one about 40 years ago. So if they had been replacing the trees that were lost, there would be a future canopy over Anapamoo Street. And I don't know why the city didn't want to do it, but they, for many years, every time one of those trees died, they put another one in. Suddenly they stopped doing it. The oak tree grows very slowly. I've got some on my property, and it would be barren if you didn't have these stone pines. Now, I know why you guys are doing it, because the trees fall over and crush your car and you get sued. And that's what it boils down to. I watched you cut all of the roots off on the street side and the sidewalk side. Year after year you cut those. Okay, I'm out of here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. The second speaker we have is Rick Clausen. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I fear there's been no significant investment in maintaining the landmark Doremus pine trees, specifically Pinus pinea, on East Anapamoo Street, even as their severe decline was recognized a decade ago. The response to major tree losses in 2013 was, wait until we get our new urban forest management plan in place, which has turned out to be a show horse more than a workhorse. Nothing really has changed. The trees continue to be handled as street trees, not as landmarks. Here are my 7 suggestions to improve on that performance. First, I would thank the STAC for its recommendation and for the work that went into it, but set aside this redesignation of the street tree for now. Second, I would request from the Department of Parks and Recreation a plan, the plan that it must have conceived on these blocks in partial preparation for establishing the new street tree, such as stump removals, median reconfigurations, and soil remediation or enrichment. Third, require a, and I quote, interdepartmental plan to manage tree and infrastructure management, unquote, as cited in the Urban Forest Management Plan, possibly with the Department of Public Works to widen the medians or reduce the traffic flow, as Mr. Jones suggested, or parking on these blocks. These are things never employed for the landmarked Doremus pine trees. Fourth, plant in those newly prepared spaces, not saplings of Quercus agrifolia, which is already the city's most common tree, according to the Urban Forest Management Plan, but saplings of Pinus pinea, the existing Italian stone pines. Fifth, impose a 5-year waiting period before reconsidering the street tree designation on these blocks. Sixth,
So you're
use whatever powers the city has, including legal research, even if it thinks it has none, to stop the butchery done by a public utility that has contributed to these trees' decline.
I'll need to ask you to wrap it up.
I am, thank you.
Okay.
This was part of objective number 1 in the 2014 Urban Forest Management Plan, so it's not a new idea.
So I need you
And
to stand-
finally, 7, treat these landmark trees as the protected wards entrusted to your care that they are.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Next speaker, Sherry Ray, and we remind you it is 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Pearl Chase was a lifelong member of the Save the Redwoods League. She founded the California Conservation Council and established the Tree of Light on Chapala and Carrillo, and stood up to the Southern Pacific Railroad to protect the Morton Bay fig tree. She loved the Italian stone pines on Anapamu and voiced concerns about their care, as many continue to do. In 2014, the Santa Barbara Independent reported on the loss of 4 of those trees. Then Mayor Helene Schneider acknowledged, "The ones to be removed will be missed tremendously." And she added, "We will endeavor to do all that we can to make sure the remaining trees thrive during the drought and for many years beyond." Is that a promise kept? The Pearl Chase Society stepped up at the city's request and invested $15,000 in irrigation devices during the drought. Then Assistant Parks and Recreation Director Zachary applauded the society's leadership and generosity, stating the stone pines provide a majestic presence in Santa Barbara and represent a key foundation of the city's urban forest. Other than the nonprofit-funded Irricades, have these cherished historic landmarks been prioritized and received the standard of care befitting their status? Can anyone honestly say or document that everything has been done to ensure their majestic presence even survives, much less thrives? None have been replaced in recent memory. It seems rather that they have been left to die off without replacements until we advocates force the issue. This multi-block, much-beloved stand of distinctive trees is far more significant to our historic community mosaic than any other designated street tree. Replacing it with common oak trees is uncharacteristically disrespectful to our collective aesthetic heritage. Our task now is to cooperatively honor Santa Barbara, to protect, preserve, and conserve, and implement best practices as good stewards of our historic trees and like replacements, not to give up and start over. Our forebears would expect nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, next is Keith Nevison. You will have 2 minutes.
I'll keep it to 2 minutes. Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Keith Nevison. I'm the Director of Horticulture and Operations at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, which is the nation's oldest botanical garden dedicated to native plants. The Botanic Garden is enthusiastically supporting the designation of Coast Live Oak, which is really a mascot tree. It's the single most important native plant in the entire state of California, capable of supporting over 400 different species of caterpillars, which enhances urban biodiversity by bringing in songbirds. And so we feel that this is a very important move by the city, and I applaud the efforts to try to save and protect the existing stone pines, not to cut them down, but to go with a gradual replacement. What I will mention about their approach as well of starting with smaller trees is this is prudent horticulturally. It allows you to kind of start with a tree that you can train over time, which will ensure better health and better form. I know that they're also committed to sourcing these plants locally, which we applaud as well. Local genetics are very important. To the prior speaker, talking about the cultural designation of Italian stone pine, this is a non-native species. Coast Live Oak, again, is a very abundant tree in Santa Barbara, but it's abundant for a reason. It's native, it's meant to be here. It does support a lot of ecological and aesthetic benefits. The garden really is the foundation of our garden is Coast Live Oak. And we, of course, are big advocates of working with oak, working with the wildlife that rely on this species in order to provide habitat, planting underneath them, which we showcase at the garden, where we encourage 110,000 guests per year to come and see that importance. So that is me here representing the Botanic Garden to advocate on behalf of the designation of Coast Live Oak for the Anapamu districts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nevison. All right, next we have Emma Brinkman, right? Yes, sorry. I had a minor reading failure. All right, as soon as you get that down to where you can reach it, I have to do that all the time. You will have 2 minutes. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chair McGill and Commissioners. I'm Emma Brinkman. I attended the STAC meeting on October 3rd. Public comment precedes the committee's discussion. I'm taking this opportunity to share my thoughts regarding the prior Street Tree Committee comments with you. As a botanist, I have an acute awareness of the plant life surrounding us. Mr. Reed, a committee member, made a comment that oak moth infestations occur every 15 years or so. I strongly disagree with his opinion. I have 7 coast live oaks surrounding our property. In the 11 years we have lived there, 3 of the oaks have suffered complete defoliation of their canopies twice. 3 of the oaks have had partial defoliations, but they have had 3 infestations. My observations suggest a 5-year cycle with the moths. The caterpillars will, when active, leave unsightly droppings under the infested trees. Anapamu experiences heavy foot traffic due to the high school. This undesired consequence was overlooked and not discussed by the committee. I would like to add that most oaks will survive moth infestations, so you can count on them hanging around. Just plan on seeing them defoliate every 5 years, and maybe more often with climate change. I request this commission weigh the potential for loss of canopy before granting approval. As important, consider the intent and spirit of the resolution when it was written, which was to preserve and maintain a historic living resource. The resolution, as you mentioned, Chair McGill, states that the Italian stone pines as tree species for all future replacement parkway plantings. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And actually, to clarify, the resolution itself does not say that. It was a staff report that said that, and the Parks Commission, but yes. That's why I asked the question after having read the public comment. All right, thank you. And our final slip is Duke McPherson.
Greetings, Commissioners. I'm a member of the Street Tree Advisory Committee, and we talked a lot about possible alternative designations for this street. The main thing I came up with was the fact that the Italian stone pine was an experiment by the early horticultural fathers, a real mistake, and there have been other experimental mistakes in this town. I won't go through the list. And so we're inheriting their mistake. They didn't realize the problems the roots were going to have with hardscape. And this is kind of an endemic thing all around the county. So I would hope that you wouldn't hold with just the Italian stone pine as a designated street tree for Anapamu Street, please. I like the Quercus agrifolia. I had my own pet choice, but I like the way that the oak tree grades in with the looks of the Italian stone pine. And it will eventually form, with this nice spreading canopy, something of the LA that the stone pines have. I'll tell you one thing, give it to the stone pines, there's nothing like the LA that they form, nice overhead. They have a mushroom shape. So please don't replant stone pines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, that's all I have in-house. Do we have anybody online? Ms. Carl?
No, Chair McGill, we have no one online.
Okay, great, thanks. I guess a couple questions arising from the comments. Can you speak to the moths and defoliation to the moths? And did you think about any co-designations?
Chair McGill, Commissioners, I think we see, and I want to preface this with I'm by no means an oak moth expert. UC Davis IPM does talk about the cyclical nature of it, and I think it does tend to be, in that 5, 6 year, every 5, 6 years, you kind of see a big boom in the population. In my time working in the city, it can be fairly sporadic. I think that that's also part of the reason why sourcing native seed stock can be really valuable. I think when you see these areas that are hit throughout the community and then you go, say, up into the Riviera where they're more naturally occurring and you see a little less of that. I'm not saying that that's, that you won't see oak moth there, right? Because it's native oak tree, native insect, right? So it's still there. But we do see, again, anecdotally, there's less when you have sort of like the natural genetics. Whereas, like we've bought and brought in things and planted coast live oak, and then it gets powdery mildew, and that's like something that you don't see either. But that's because they came from, not our area, and so they're more susceptible to those things. So I think that that's true. I think what Ms. Brinkman said, there is some accuracy to that. I think that it was, when you look at the measured benefits that the tree provides, that was a small factor in terms of it wouldn't be a deal breaker by any means. Again, I think because it is common and it does happen. And then to your question about co-designation, they did talk about co-designating stone pine and coast live oak, and kind of quickly it was like, if there's all these reasons why we're saying stone pine isn't really acceptable for the street, why would we give it like a token designation when there's really no intent on using it? And then I think further, when we look at the coast live oak designation as a single species, that's somewhat atypical to what we've been seeing at the commission level, especially in the last few years, where we've really kind of been pushing the envelope for building diversity in. I think the high adaptability and that the oak tree being able to perform well in the varying sizes of parkways along Anapamu, as well as this desire to kind of recreate that aesthetic, that strong, single species tree-lined street. I think if there was ever a time to do that, the committee felt that just relying on a species was what made a lot of practical sense here, rather than co-designating multiple species.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And I know there's a lot of, I'm hearing and reading a lot of, I guess I'm going to call it frustration over the years of not planting replacement trees and having so many vacant tree wells. I kind of get that, and I can see why that would be frustrating. Unfortunately, that's just, we can't turn that clock back. That's where we are.
Chair McGill and commissioners, part of the decision related to planting the trees was applied citywide during the drought.
Yeah.
And it was a decision that was made at that time, thinking it was in the best interest of the city's uncertain source of water. That is something that we're trying to catch up on, having not planted trees for a period of time. And so one of our priorities is to continue to plant trees. We do know that these trees on this block present a myriad of issues and considerations that need thorough public discussion before we move forward with planting either stone pines or coast live oaks, or if there's another tree that the commission would like to designate. And once that's done, we'll be able to move forward and be in a position where we can actually make sure that new trees that are planted, just like we do citywide, are able to thrive to the best of our ability.
Okay, thanks. That's actually really helpful. Thank you. All right. Great silence. If there's going to be, all right.
Are we questioning or commenting?
It's comment and/or motion.
First of all, I have tremendous respect for the people who spoke today, especially Richard, Sri Ray, and Emma. I think your historical knowledge is impressive. You've done your research, and your passion for these trees is amazing. And I feel like we all share that because everyone up here is a really strong advocate for our urban forest. That being said, with all due respect, I feel like it wouldn't be responsible in terms of infrastructure and ecological drawbacks to not change the designation to a tree that fits better with our environment and the way our world is today in Santa Barbara. If something isn't working, there's that old cliche definition of insanity is to like keep doing the same thing over and over again. So we've seen that the stone pines are just, at this time in our climate, they're not the right tree for that spot. And I would like to support a motion to change the designation to the Quercus.
I'm going to go ahead and second that motion, and I'm going to do it with comment as well. I know we don't normally do that, because this is a tough one. I happen to love stone pines. I think of them as pan parasols from a different side of the pond. They're one of my favorite trees. But it's, it's for all the reasons that have been stated, including having trees thrive where they want to thrive, and putting in the native trees, I support it. But also, it's kind of like speaking for the tree. If this was a mammal, and it was a big, large dog, you would be accused of being kind of cruel if you decided you needed to close it up in a bathroom every day, because it wouldn't have room to grow and thrive and be its best self. And I struggle with force-fitting a tree that doesn't want to be there and isn't appropriate for the location to be there, when there are better options and more appropriate options. And, the 46 that are still there will be cared for and maintained, and if this is not an immediate process. So, yeah, I will second the motion. Should it pass, should the motion pass. I would say we can, we do have a motion on the table, and I will open up for discussion, and then we'll go for a vote. All right.
I'll add the discussion. This is a tough one for me because I've always enjoyed these trees, and more so when we had visitors from out of town, and when it was a nice tunnel, we would always go by there. But at the same time, I'm born and raised on the west side. When I started walking to Santa Barbara High School through Anapamu. And so we're going like close to 50 years ago. I remember when I was walking to school 50 years ago, there was issues with the sidewalk. So I agree with your insanity part. We know what's going to happen if we continue planting more stone pines. My only question is the oak tree, the excellent tree. Mr. McPherson, you mentioned, I don't know if I could ask this question, but you said that you had a suggestion. I'm just curious to know what type of tree you thought would have been nice at the appropriate time, if you could let us know.
Go ahead and answer. Yeah, go ahead. You probably just come to the microphone so it gets recorded properly.
Thank you. I'm honored to give my opinion, but it's one that I think is impractical. The idea here, not to go on too long about this, the idea is what you're talking about, the overhang, the overlap.
Canopy.
That's just wonderful about the stone pine. The other one that is good for that is the Tipuana-Tipu. It grows fast, establishes this kind of canopy. You can see it down there in that parking lot on Carrillo Street just before you get the on-ramp to 101. I mean, it's just a roof. However, there's a price to pay, high maintenance. Talk to Mr. Slack about that. Very high maintenance. And I don't know if it suits the character of the street integrating with the, interplanting with the stone pines. So that's
And it
my-
was called what again? What type of tree?
Tipuana-Tipu, it's from Brazil.
So it's not a native. Yeah.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's a nice tree. Thanks.
And one thing regarding the oak trees, I just so happen to have a oak tree in front of my property. And regarding the moths, that it's going to be an issue. But then we probably won't have to worry about that for 50 years or so, you know. But on our property or on the parkway in front of the house, it probably happens every other year. So 5 to 6 years, I would say that's incorrect. I would go every other year, and sometimes it's terrible. But it bounces back. Regarding the existing stone pines, to take care of them properly, was there any talk of possibly underground utilities to prevent that artwork from the...
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, in my time here, we've made sure that, one, I think if you were to go down the path of undergrounding the trees, you'd probably have to take them all out because it would create too much conflict with even getting them underground. And I think the best that we've done is we have a good working relationship with Edison. They have special notes in their system. And so despite what's happened maybe, decades ago, they've worked with us, and there's really, based on the nominal voltage, they really only need like just under 2 feet of clearance. So, I think we had a resident come speak before the commission last time as well, and he's been with us at the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting, and he got a notice from Edison that they were going to prune the tree, and then I reached out to the vegetation manager, and I said, I don't think that this really needs pruning right now. They did, a re-inspection, followed up with the notes that they're doing as little as possible. Now, citywide, they're doing more than they used to do. They're trying to minimize that risk, but we've done as much as we can to minimize the impacts. But some of the tree, once the tree canopy starts to go north of the utility lines, you start to see that V shape, and that's pretty difficult to do anything about, especially given the tree's size. And then the age of the stone pines, they don't generate new growth as well. So even if you were to reduce that to make it look more aesthetically appealing, you'd end up with just stubs because you won't get like latent buds popping. So you won't see that new growth. Like if somebody tops a tree, which we never want trees topped, but a lot of times those latent buds will pop and you'll get new growth. And that's something that most conifers in general don't do a good job of, and especially when they're, several decades old, like the stone pines.
Okay. And what size tree do you propose will be planted?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, about this, sort of the sweet spot for us is what we would call like a 15-gallon. So it's about maybe an inch in caliper, kind of right by the root flare, and then can vary in height from, say we planted it in the ground, it could be, 4 to 5 feet, kind of on average. Branched all the way to the ground, preferably, because all of those individual branches kind of help feed the stem, and then just kind of manage it that way. It's kind of like counterintuitive. You want big, fast, like landscape architect, like giant tree, right off the bat. But a lot of times that doesn't work. I don't even know the name of the hotel that's right on the ocean side. But as you're driving south of town, they built that brand new, beautiful, giant hotel right there by the water as you're exiting Montecito.
The Miramar?
Yeah, maybe. And if you look at all the trees now, there's about a foot or two of canopy decline. They brought in all these giant trees, and it looked amazing. And now they're all struggling immensely because transplanting large trees is very, very difficult to do well. And when you put that small one in, it over and over again will outperform the big tree.
And will there be special time and attention to have the trees grow straight? Because I tend to see young trees have a problem growing straight.
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana. Yeah, I think we've really ramped up our small tree care program in general. So, it's just a loose staking. You want to encourage a little bit of movement because that stimulates root development. But otherwise, yeah, we have a pretty robust structural pruning program, and our perfect world is a straight stem with the lowest branch at 14 feet, so everything can drive under it. Nature can be somewhat difficult to deal with sometimes, but yeah, we're trying really hard to keep them nice and straight.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you. I think that's it for me. It'll be a tough one to see the Anapamu different, but It's part of life.
I guess on that note, it sounds like it's vote time. Yeah, yeah, okay, let's go. With same motion, we had a motion from Vice Chair Clark to approve the designation of the 300 to 800 block of East Panet to the coastal live oak. And I seconded it. I will, thank you. We're there. Okay, the motion passes, and before everybody goes away, I'm going to read the appeal language, which is that any action of the Parks and Recreation Commission made pursuant to Santa Barbara Municipal Code, Chapter 1520, tree planting and maintenance, or Chapter 1524, preservation of trees, may be appealed to City Council within 10 days pursuant to provisions of Section 130050 of the Municipal Code. So you have right of appeal, and it's within 10 days. Okay, thank you very much. And that takes us to Almond Avenue.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the last Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is also a street tree designation, request for a street tree designation change. This is for Almond Avenue. Some of us may recall seeing a project not too terribly long ago at the corner of Mitchell-Terena and Almond Avenue where they're building a large health clinic. And we've talked about this, we'll continue talking about this more and more. The city has, as well as the state, it falls in general line with the state, but the city was kind of ahead of the curve to require what we would call low or very low water use plants. And on commercial developments, the commitment is to use low or very low exclusively. And that applies to street trees as well. And due to the designation listing being, a lot of those are pretty old. Some of them go back to 1977. There's a lot of trees that, are classified as medium water use. And we're running into a problem now where building plans can't make it through the plan check process because the proposed street tree, which everybody wants, is medium or, it's not a low water use essentially. So we're going to continue to see an uptick of these. We've been working in partnership with Water Conservation. They did an analysis of our street tree designation listing and found about 70 streets or street segments that don't conform to the current water ordinance. So we'll be seeing lots of fun designation changes. That doesn't preclude us from having other species, so we can still work on diversity, but we do need to make a commitment to at least one low or very low water use tree. So on Almond Avenue, the previous designation was purple-leaf plum generically, Prunus cercifera, which is a short-lived, small, almost like a patio tree kind of thing, and is medium use in terms of water classification. There's other species on the street. Actually, I talk about Almond Avenue a lot because if you visit the street, there's a tipu, there's a deodar cedar, there's ginkgos, there's jacarandas. I don't know if there's a single purple leaf plum on the street, but there's this just hodgepodge amount of different trees on that small little street, but it provides such a unique experience that I think it's like proof in the pudding that you don't have to have the same species to get like the same feel, that everybody loves. And there are a few ginkgos already on street, and that's not a low water use tree, but it's something that we have around. It does perform well in the parkway width. And to kind of build on the diversity, we provided a staff report to the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommending to keep ginkgo as a recommended species, and then to co-designate the desert willow, which is a very, very drought-tolerant species, for co-designation on Almond Avenue. We discussed it, the committee was unanimously supportive and made a recommendation to amend the designation to include both the desert willow and the maidenhair tree as designations for Almond Avenue.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? I don't. I have no questions. Then I do not have any speaker slips here. Do we have anybody online?
No, Chair McGill, there is no one online.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Okay, with that, I assume that means a motion will be fairly straightforward.
I'm fine with these 2 trees proposed and make a motion to have these trees be the designated street tree for Almond Avenue.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? I believe Vice Chair Clark just seconded. All right. If there is no discussion at all, we will go to a vote. And I assume it's yes. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mr. Slack. That concludes the trees for this month. And that takes us to our director's report.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, following on the heels of summer, the fall activity season is in full swing. In addition, as you know, we reported on our summer programs last month, and that staff immediately moved into recreation after school programs and any number of other activities. So I'm happy to share with you a couple of things that have happened, will happen. Number one, the Santa Barbara Youth Council, in partnership with the Future Leaders of America, hosted a candidates forum on Monday at the Franklin Neighborhood Center. This is something that the Youth Council's been doing since its inception. It gives the youth the opportunity to ask questions of candidates regarding their interest and commitment to youth issues. I have to apologize right up front in case you have a question. I was not at that because I was out of town, and I unfortunately did not just get the update, but I will make sure that you receive that. It's generally very well attended, full of students, and I know before when they were putting it together, I think they had at least half of the candidates that had committed to showing up. This is a busy season for them, so as you can imagine, they probably have quite a few engagements. Similarly, Trunk or Treat is back again. We do that in partnership with the Police Activities League and the Youth Council, and this year it'll be held on October 30th, which is Wednesday from 5 to 7:30. We do it in the Spencer Adams parking lot. So, as you know, that large parking lot space that's between our buildings. And it's actually become more and more popular. Families show up, people show up with their cars decorated. I believe last year the park rangers won the prize for the best decorated vehicle. We do it in partnership with PAL, police department, and also the fire department show up. It's a great way for kids to have a fun, safe, enjoyable Halloween, and everybody is welcome. And then the other thing that kicks off, and to a large extent, is a number of our adapted recreation program events. So we have the Bowling League, which started in early October, and that continues for some time. And then we have the Halloween dance that's coming up on Friday of this week, and that's held at Carrillo Recreation Center from 7 to 9. We've been doing it for 49 years, so next year will be a big one. 2025 will be the 50th year. We have a great turnout for that. I think one of the most special thing about it is this flash mob thriller dance event, and it makes all of the participants really happy and excited. And then Thanksgiving's just around the corner. I feel like it was just Thanksgiving just around the corner. And the Kiwanis Club has been a super great partner of ours over the years in terms of hosting a Thanksgiving luncheon. We are having it at the West Side Center, which we've done successfully for a few years. The Kiwanis Club coordinates the event. They bring in their volunteers. They contribute money. And we have a number of staff that also volunteer and help out. Last year, it was 250 participants, so it's both the folks and their caregivers, if they have caregivers, and anticipate the same number of folks this year. And then the Rose Garden, as you know, we have a solid group of Rose Garden volunteers, and recently pandemic and post-pandemic, our annual pruning day attracts more than 100 people out. And as a result of that, plus the work effort of our staff, more people volunteer on a regular basis to help us maintain the Rose Garden. And so the volunteer event is tomorrow, in case you don't have anything to do, on Thursday afternoon. It'll be from 3:30 to 4:30, and we host it in the Rose Garden themselves to thank our core volunteers for their effort. And then lastly, State Parks and Recreation, the Department of State Parks and Recreation has what they call, it's not in here, it's called their SCORP, which is their annual planning tool that they develop, which covers usually about a 5-year period. And that planning tool helps them develop guidelines and criteria for grants and projects that could be funded with bond funds. As you know, there's a bond on the ballot for this year as well that would also potentially generate funds for park projects throughout the state. They reached out to us and asked if we would host or provide a location for residents of the Santa Barbara area to come talk about their priorities for recreation, to help inform their effort to develop this plan, and then also inform their effort to develop funding guidelines. And that happened on October 1st. We hosted it at Mackenzie Park in the Adult Center, the idea being easy to access for anybody, easy parking. We had Spanish translation as well in the event. We had people that wanted to participate in Spanish, and about 15 community members show up and provide their input and ideas. And that's it, all I have to report this evening. Happy
right.
to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's always good to see, another active month with some really great programs. I have no questions. Anybody have any questions? Yeah. Okay. With that.
I do have one question.
Yes.
To request other updates, what's the proper, can I mention it on old business? Maybe by the end of the year, if we could have an update, or what is the proper way to request the update?
I think the question is, how do you get something on the agenda, an update on the agenda?
Okay, yes.
Well, yeah, Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, feel free to send me an email and say, hey, staff presented on this. Can you come back and tell us something more? It may only fall into a director's report because there's not a lot to share, or we might be able to say, we're ready to provide you with more information. We can do that as part of XYZ report. We do try to foresee what the commission would like to stay up to date on, and then obviously the things that we need you to act on as a commission. I will say that we have 2 things in the hopper that we'll be bringing forward. One is kind of a look back over, I think it's 8 years of the grants and donations, the money that comes outside the department to support who we are and what we do, to give the commission a really good picture of recent efforts. And then also Commissioner Clark asked for kind of a report of what the commission's achieved. And we are working on that, and our plan is to be able to deliver that in December, culminating the calendar year, and be able to present that to you.
Okay, I'll send you an email and
Please feel free to
CC
do that.
our chair.
Absolutely, that would be great.
Thank you.
Great, okay. Okay, with that, there is no old business, there is no new business, so I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. And thank you very much, and see you all next month.